This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, an international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. To join our global community and access member-only webinars, events, a wide range of digital learning offerings, coaching and leadership resources, accreditation schemes and more, you can find us at associationforcoaching.com. Hello and welcome to the Association for Coaching podcast. My name is Rob Lawrence and I'm your host for this Boost Your Coaching Business series. My guest today is somebody who has founded an organisation devoted to helping the next generation lead the lives they want. He is the CEO and founder of the successful charity CoachBright, offering coaching to schools and universities, and as a second-generation immigrant, he set up CoachBright in 2014, having experienced the transformational impact that both university and coaching had given to him personally. Today, he is a fellow at the School for Social Entrepreneurs, as well as an associate faculty for the Academy of Executive Coaching. So to talk about his own insights and experience and to help you towards boosting your own coaching business today, I'm delighted to introduce to you Robin Chew. Robin, welcome.
Rob, thanks so much. And oh my days, that was amazing. You just did that off the cuff. I feel like people will think that was pre-prepared, pre-recorded, but that was just live.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Yeah, it's a strength in the bullet points there, I think. Great stuff. So for our listener, I'd love to learn more about your journey with CoachBright and the work that you do and how your business has evolved and what that's taught you. But before we go there, I recognise our listener may not know anything about you, Robin. So I'd love for you just to share with us briefly how you show up in the world today and how would you describe to someone what it is that you do?
Yeah, so I think how I show up in the world today, I'd probably say a nice way to describe me is I'm broadly quite an optimistic, glass half full individual, but also kind of fiercely pragmatic for kind of social change and wanting to make a difference in this world to kind of impact it positively, and hopefully I kind of play a part in doing that. And for the last 7 years, so I'm now 29, but I kind of set up CoachBright when I was 22. For the last 7 years, that's been through this, incredible vehicle that is CoachBright. So we're a education, social mobility charity, taking the best of coaching really and applying it to disadvantaged young people to, like you said, help them lead the lives they want. And that's been an amazing journey and has really shaped who I am almost as an adult, really, because it's been so much of my adult kind of career and life. But I guess in short, it's kind of being optimistic, being pragmatic. That's kind of how I am. And also, the important thing to note, Rob, is that I'm also a huge Liverpool Football Club supporter. And I've discovered gardening as a kind of late hobby during lockdown. So I feel if it all fails, I can just do that instead as well.
Oh, that's great to know. Very good. I'm curious, Robin, what inspired you to found CoachBright in the first instance?
Yeah, I think for me, it was two things. So one was I was the second in my family to go to university. And it's important to say kind of right off the bat in this conversation that, I loved university. It was one of the best and, most, in a lot of ways, one of the most kind of foremost experiences for me in shaping who I am today. I would absolutely not be able to be here with you, Rob, during this podcast without having gone to university, discovered who I am, developed the kind of communication skills and confidence that I got through doing that. But also while at university, I went to the University of Exeter. It was very clear to me the kind of friends I was hanging out with, the people I was kind of living in halls with and going to courses with came from a very different background than the one that my parents came from. So my parents are owners of a local Chinese takeaway, and, that's how I used to spend a lot of my Friday and Saturday nights kind of growing up. And it was amazing to me the kind of disconnects that the people that my parents would hang out with on a Friday and Saturday night was so different than the people that I kind of hung out with at university. And that kind of always stayed with me, I guess, once I left university and went into my first job, that why is it that education at the moment is so unfair and doesn't allow certain groups and certain types of individuals to flourish in that environment? And then I guess the second big moment was in my first job. I had a coach. I had this amazing coach called Nick Nielsen. Like with most people, I imagine, I thought this guy, Nick, he was in his 40s, and I thought he would come and kind of tell me what to do and give me the secret sauce to life, I guess, give me the answers to everything. But instead, obviously, he kind of was just an amazing listening ear and asked me some tough questions and essentially got me to figure out answers for myself, which is what I find is the amazing process of coaching. It's essentially self-discovery. And that kind of led me to think, is there a way to take coaching, which is still then in 2014 very much for kind of executive leaders, senior leaders in business? Is there a way we could take this amazing tool that empowers individuals to think for themselves and to try stuff for themselves and take it into a very different arena, which is schools and really deprived communities, and support young people to become that bit more independent, that bit more resilient, that bit more of a growth mindset? And that was really the kind of idea, really, is like, could we democratize coaching for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds? And luckily enough, a school in South London in 2014 kind of took a chance on us and said, yeah, we'll give it a go. And kind of 7 years later, people are still taking chances on us, and here we are.
That's great. So what I'm hearing there then, it was kind of a convergence of two sort of life moments for you. This contrast between the people that your parents hung out with at the weekends versus those that you met at university, and also the opportunity to be coached and have a coach. I'm curious, how did that opportunity to be coached come about?
So that was from my first manager at the time, and it's important to note that this was in my first job as well. So I think I was very lucky to get a coach really early on in my career. My manager kind of knew about the power of coaching and spotted, it would be interesting if Robin had someone to work with on being more assertive and being kind of clearer in his communication, and that led me to Nick, and it's hard to describe really, because as kind of fellow coaches here on this call, Rob, but for everyone listening, I feel it's impossible to really communicate the power of coaching until you've had it, until you've realized, oh right, what it is literally someone just being in your corner and getting to the depths of what you want and what's holding you back, and that was amazing for me at the age of 22, because it gave me so much power. It essentially made me so much more proactive in realizing I can fix a lot of the things I want to fix. I can solve these problems, which I feel probably before that I was probably a lot more passive and a lot more kind of, things happen and circumstances happen. But I think coaching really pushed me into the kind of driving seat of my life and stuff like that, which is incredible, really.
There's something to be said for getting coaching early on in your life, isn't there? Learning from your experience there.
Absolutely. And I think there's an interesting distinction here between, still now in 2021, coaching is reserved for leaders or CEOs or kind of board members predominantly. I appreciate it is moving kind of further downward, because for me, I was exposed to it so early on. I think what it's enabled me to do is to take far more responsibility for my own life, far more responsibility in shaping the kind of decisions I make and the choices that I make, which I'm obviously biased, obviously running a coaching organization for young people, but I absolutely think it's the missing jigsaw piece in education and actually in HR as well, for kind of young professionals too. That a common critique that people say when recent graduates or school leavers enter the workplace is they're like waiting for instruction, or they're not very mature, or they're not very resilient and able to cope with the demanding kind of pace of work. And I think part of the answer to a lot of that is coaching, which essentially enables you to unpack what your values are, unpack kind of who you are and what you stand for. And if you do that when you're 50, it's not that it's too late. It obviously has a purpose, but I feel if you can do it when you're in your 20s, I think it can be far more transformative in kind of shaping a more kind of intentional and purposeful life moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And I must admit, I've never really thought about it that way in terms of it being the missing piece in so many situations and circumstances where, what can we do here to achieve the results that we're looking for? And actually coaching could be the missing piece there. So I love that way, the way that you frame that. I'd love to get into how you've grown the business and how you've grown yourself through that process. But before we go there, I know that making a difference is clearly important to you. Tell me about some of the differences that you've made with the coaching work that you've done through Coach Bright with schools and universities. What sort of impact have you had so far?
Yeah, this is, absolutely the reason I kind of get out of bed in the morning. And, I think running a social mobility charity, you're so privileged by the kind of small effects you can have on a young person's life. So over the years, we've helped countless young people kind of become the first in their family to go to university, the first in their family to kind of enter certain kind of industries and professions. And the example I always come back to is this amazing, because I'm still in touch with her now, and we actually funnily enough, work in the same workplace because she's so much older. But it's this amazing pupil at the time called Esther, who was one of the first pupils we worked with in a school in Elephant and Castle in South London. And Esther is one of those pupils that you see in school quite a lot, in that you'll see her kind of almost kind of bouncing up and down the corridors with excitement and real kind of, I don't know, like an intention and energy and purpose. And she'll shout from the end of the corridor and go like, "Oh, sir, like, how's your day? How's it going? How are things?" And Esther is also, at this time, she was in year 12 and was absolutely determined to go on to university and absolutely determined to become a management consultant. So you imagine this kind of 17-year-old talking about becoming a management consultant.
Yeah.
But all the national statistics and that kind of school's kind of demographic at the time is that Esther, because she was a pupil on free school meals, a disadvantaged pupil, it's far less likely that she'd go on to a top university, far less likely that she'd enter what you might call a kind of leading profession, such as kind of management and consultancy. In 2021, there is still a kind of postcode lottery, right? That where you are born still has a much bigger effect on kind of where you end up and your lifetime earnings and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, long story short, we supported Esther through sixth form by matching her with a coach, a volunteer university student coach, and they worked together for over 2 years. And then at the end of those 2 years, Esther did become the first in her family to go to university. She went to Manchester University. She was the first in her family to go to Manchester as well. And now she's through the other side of that and has graduated from the University of Manchester and is now actually not becoming a consultant. She's setting up an empathy museum, which is fascinating.
Wow.
And yeah, and I think for me, the work that we do, it's an exercise in delayed gratification almost. You don't, and actually that's probably the same for most coaching, is you probably don't see the results in the moment. You don't see it in that session on a Tuesday afternoon. You don't see them like improve their behavior or change their, where they are, but you will do over time. And I think that's almost the kind of magic behind coaching, which is sometimes can be a bit frustrating, as you're like, oh, we've done so much good work, but it almost happens 6 months down the line or a year down the line is when you kind of see the effects of that. And for me, obviously that's why why Coach Bright exists and why we do what we do, is to take that power of coaching but apply it to disadvantaged groups and enable them to go on and smash life and do whatever it is they want to do, which is amazing, really, and obviously really, really humbling to be like even a small part of that, that catalyst for that individual.
That's amazing, Robin. So I'm curious to know, how do you work with academic organisations and educational institutions? What would a typical engagement look like for you? And also curious to know perhaps what some of the challenges are around that type of engagement, coaching in schools and universities. I can't imagine, I don't know. Is it a smooth process or what sort of challenges do you have to overcome to achieve that vision that you're talking about there?
Yeah. So as you can imagine, a coaching organisation in schools and universities who are typically, it has changed, but typically have not understood what coaching means, or not understood the kind of the pure benefit of, you know, what coaching does, because like we said at the start, right, the only way you know is by experiencing it. It was, the challenge was really helping people understand the value of it. So I mean, we're lucky now in that we work with over 60 schools up and down the country. We partner with some leading universities like Exeter University, University of Birmingham, Oxford University in the past. But really at the kind of start, for us, it was really drilling down with schools in particular. What is it that we can offer them, or what is it that, you know, we can support in terms of the challenges they have? And we identified very quickly that at school level, head teachers are almost dictators. So they are what you might call the budget holder. They kind of decide on whether their school is willing to kind of part with any cash for your kind of service. And for us, while coaching in itself is undoubtedly an amazing transformative experience, that wasn't really the message to sell to school head teachers. I think for them on the ground, and, you know, they're judged by Ofsted and performance tables and stuff like that. For them, the thing that really mattered is hardcore grades and attainment. So the challenge for us was somehow proving that by enabling your pupils to have a coach, to have this kind of self-awareness journey, your pupils would improve in their maths or their English. And over the years, we've, you know, tweaked our coaching methodology and our program to make that even more the case. And I think there's an interesting learning there for me as to, while I, like, you know, personally love coaching and you know, couldn't stop banging on about it, others might not understand it or share that appreciation. And then there's something about being pragmatic enough to understand what is it that drives decision making for that individual, in our case the kind of head teacher who's in a challenging school who needs support for their academic results. And our challenge at the start of Coach Bright was marrying up those two things. So showcasing that coaching at its best can improve results, because as we know, if we can make people, regardless of what age they are, feel more confident, more purposeful, they are going to improve their performance in whatever, you know, guise that is. In our case, it was obviously improving GCSE results and A-level results at the time. And, you know, we've shown that over the years that really good coaching can help people become more purposeful, can help people improve their GCSE results, etc. So there was something about marrying up the intangibleness of coaching with the kind of pragmatic, I don't want to call it return on investment, because that feels almost too too factory like. But I think there is something to be said for that, to kind of marrying up to what your kind of head teachers' expectations are, and, you know, what they need.
That's really fascinating, Robin, because what I'm hearing there is this is about you having to demonstrate and help people understand the actual value of coaching. So more practically, how have you managed to do that then? Have you had to provide evidence sort of before and after, that kind of thing? Or what's the process been in terms of convincing these schools and universities to actually buy into coaching? I
think the short answer is evidence of impact, like you alluded to. So at the end of each coaching session or, you know, coaching program, we essentially show the head teachers that we work with, or the school leaders we work with, evidence around how we change that pupil's grades, change that pupil's confidence, change that pupil's independence. So we do pre and post pupil statement surveys before and after the program to measure confidence and independence. And then we use the school's own internal grade analysis to measure how our pupils do in comparison to pupils not on the Coach Bright program, and also pupils kind of not on the Coach Bright program kind of nationally. So obviously, working in the education sector, there's loads of different data sets and loads of different things that we can access. So we've partnered with organizations to essentially evaluate our work completely independent of us. So we work with another charity called Impact Ed to evaluate everything that we do, to show that it's not just us saying it's good, it's kind of other people. And obviously that gives us a real kind of quality standard and does that. But I think the other thing to say is, once you kind of align with the school's kind of pragmatic needs and objectives, there's something to be said for, you know, relationships are everything. And I think the thing that I've always felt Coach Bright we've done really well at is we've spent time really investing in that relationship. We don't see it as just a coaching program, I guess. Like there is also value to be added to just really understanding the customer, in our case, the head teacher, really understanding what they need, the culture of their school, the kind of additional benefits of having a coaching program. So I don't just mean for the 20 pupils that it impacts in year 10, but how can we translate that to other parts of the school? For example, how can we, we've gone into schools to do kind of one-off CPD days for their teachers and to show them kind of very basic kind of coaching techniques. And we've also spoken to kind of school assemblies around what coaching kind of looks like and how you can think about that in relation to your own kind of work. So for us, there's something about understanding that relationship is kind of everything. And interestingly, over the years, for schools that we've done that well at, even when things have, and naturally, working with young people and using volunteers, things can at sometimes go wrong. But with those schools where we have a fantastic relationship with, where they feel we're really in their corner and, we prioritize their kind of them and who they are as human beings and individuals, we have kind of credit in the bank, and they're willing to kind of let certain things slide if it isn't quite to the standard they expected. So there's an amazing thing there, which I feel sometimes we forget in business, is that first and foremost, it's not business, it's kind of human to human, and humans have challenges and humans have good days and bad days, and fellow coaches have good days and bad days. And I think sometimes working in a kind of human to human industry, we forget that and we hold each other to expectations that are almost impossible. And I think so much of the work we try and do at CoachBright is kind of normalizing, there are going to be good days and bad days, essentially, and kind of working with people to understand that. And amazingly, when you kind of get that, then people, are far more, they see it, and they treat you like you're human as well, I think, which I think then ironically leads to better business and, more impactful work.
I think what you're saying there is so aligned with so many of the interviews in this short series that we've had, which is it's all about relationships, and it's about, perhaps more practically understanding your customer and developing that relationship and over time. But I thought also, again, from a practical point of view, I was inspired by what you said there about these sort of pre and post statements, pupil statement surveys, which I guess would be also a great way to sort of somewhat subjectively measure the performance or the impact that coaching is having. So I think there's some great food for thought there for folks finding their own ways to perhaps developing methods of actually helping others to understand the value of coaching. But I really like what you were saying there about relationships, and it sounds to me that very much the success of CoachBright so far is based upon that. So with that in mind, I'm curious to learn more in terms of what the reality of growing CoachBright has been for you, and what would you say was your first major turning point? When did the rubber really hit the tarmac for you with CoachBright?
I mean, so the reality is, it's just huge highs and lows, I think, Rob. I think, and important to say that, I've stood on the shoulders of amazing people. That CoachBright is essentially built through favors and people much smarter than me. And, so much of it is that, which I guess we can explore a bit later. On the turning point thing, it was relatively early on. I mean, there's been a few, but I think one that was really important, really early on, was after our first program, where it was me and a friend did a lot of the coaching. We suddenly realized that to do the work that we wanted to do it properly, to support young people up and down the country from disadvantaged backgrounds to really flourish and do whatever it is they want to do, it was silly and unsustainable to think that we could do it, as in we could do the coaching. So very early on, we discovered that if we wanted to do this work properly at scale, we needed a different way of thinking, which is how can we train other people to be the coaches? How can we essentially widen the net of people that are coaches? And that led us down the route of, which is what we do now, which is we train university students as volunteer coaches, and then they work with young people in secondary school and primary school up and down the country. And this academic year, we support just over 2,200 pupils, and hopefully next year it'll be double that. And we've got a kind of volunteer team of just over 900 volunteers across kind of London, the West Midlands, the Southwest. And that was quite interesting for us because it meant there had to be quite a lot of transition quite early doors. It couldn't have just been reliant on how good you were as a coach anymore. It wasn't just a case of you could turn up on a Wednesday afternoon and whether you were any good or not would determine the success of the program. It relied on really formalizing what does being a Coach Bright coach look like? What does training to be a Coach Bright coach look like? What level of quality are we happy with? Because obviously the volunteers would ultimately be the representation of our brand and what we kind of stood for. And therefore we had to become really clear quite quickly about what culture we wanted to establish. So for me, there was something quite important, probably because I'm personally hopefully live up to this, but something quite important about humility in the coaching process. So humility, and that kind of translated to as an organization that, you know, no matter how impactful the program is, it's still a very small part of that individual's life. And therefore we should be humble enough to admit that, but also humble enough to, you know, seek change and listen for kind of where we can improve and how we can learn and all of that. And we had to really codify a lot of those kind of more cultural value-based conversations really early on, because we wanted to, so much of what we did at the time was about scale and reaching more young people. It didn't feel right to us that only kind of 20 pupils would have access to coaching. We were like, oh, this is a national problem of educational disadvantage and there being a postcode lottery. Therefore, the more young people we can impact, the better. And that kind of led us down, that route of making sure that I wasn't kind of the kind of coach kind of in the classroom doing that, and more the kind of trainer of coaches and more the kind of arbiter of what our kind of culture and kind of values looked like. But that was quite a big shock, I think, and quite a big turning point, because it obviously meant releasing a lot of control and allowing others to kind of take the lead, which I think increasingly I've become better at.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those things you don't really learn until you actually get into the thick of it and turn your ideas into action, and then you start learning that that's what's involved.
Absolutely. And that moment when for us, it was obviously that moment, all our sessions are in the afternoon, so about kind of 3 to 4 o'clock. And it's that moment when you go and supervise a session and you see 20 university student coaches, 20 pupils, all in a room kind of having a conversation, and you're like, oh gosh, I hope they're saying the right stuff and I hope it's going well. And I think there's so much power in being able to let go and being able to, heard it many a time. I'm still not very good at it, Rob, but this idea of kind of trusting in the process and trusting that, you know, trusting in that. And so there's almost that kind of scary moment of you're like, oh gosh, is this gonna go okay? But more often than not, it does. So that is good. And I think, and important to say that, you know, we wouldn't be here if we didn't do that. We wouldn't have been able to create the impact that we wanted to create. And also we wouldn't have been able to reach kind of parts of the country that commonly don't get access to stuff like this. And I think that was really important for me. I don't know whether it's because my partner's from Stoke-on-Trent, so I always make the joke of like, if you can't do it on a Tuesday night in Stoke-on-Trent, like could you do it anywhere? Like, which obviously football fans will get. I think for me, there's something about, obviously our guiding purpose is taking coaching to disadvantaged communities. A lot of that is outside London, and a lot of that is in, you know, what you might call kind of social mobility cold spots, kind of really areas that are really difficult to get to. So that obviously meant that our model had to be bigger than just me and bigger than just a small group of people. It had to be a much more kind of expansive kind of proposition.
Yeah, I'm with you. You mentioned the term there, social mobility. You mentioned it a couple of times earlier as well, and I'm just curious that what you mean by that, because I recognise our listener may not understand what you mean by that term. So could you just briefly explain that for us?
Social mobility for me, and there are different definitions, for me is simply enabling a person to be able to choose what kind of social class or what kind of area they want to kind of move into. So a common way to think about it is, if you out-earn your parents, you're considered kind of socially mobile. A broader way to think about it is actually, are we enabling people to be able to make informed choices, to be able to do whatever it is they want to do, and therefore kind of be socially mobile? So kind of common example I come back to a lot is we do a lot of work in Plymouth and Exeter, and a lot of the pupils in those areas will say in their kind of first or second coaching sessions stuff like, oh, like I'm not really that interested in going to university or getting good grades because I'm just going to become a mechanic. I'm going to copy my dad and become a mechanic. And I think there's a really interesting element there of there is absolutely nothing wrong with becoming a mechanic. However, there is something wrong with not enabling that young person to understand the full breadth of options and choices available to them. I think it's quite easy when you come from a disadvantaged background to pigeonhole certain people to, they were this, they're going to become that, and, there's no change there. And for me, there's something about, and that's where coaching is so powerful. If you can enable someone a safe space that is non-judgmental with a qualified professional, the ability to just think through what is it they want to achieve in life, what is it they really care about, what's kind of practically stopping them from getting there, but really that kind of explorative process. If out of that explorative process you still come back to, I want to become a mechanic, then that's absolutely amazing. No problem with that. But commonly what we find is by going through that process, young people discover they want to do X, or they want to learn more about Y, or they're more curious about what life outside Devon looks like, or whatever. And I think to deny people that opportunity to just think and have a safe space to do that, I think is an absolute crime. And I think that almost sits at the heart of, everything we've said so far, that a lot of it is relationships, a lot of it is just cultivating a space for kind of interesting work to happen. And then, as with anything, as with all coaching, you have to trust in the client to then decide for themselves, which is what we do.
That's great, Robin. Thank you so much for that explanation. More than I asked for there, which is absolutely fantastic. So very grateful for that context. That's great. Just going back to what we were saying a moment ago, you were speaking to the importance of thinking about the culture and the values of what it is that you're creating early on. You mentioned that you got help with that growth with Coach Bright ongoing, perhaps. I'm curious to know, what sort of help have you received? What would you attribute to the success of Coach Bright, and who would you attribute the success of Coach Bright to so far?
I think it's not one person. I think it's almost this countless. The amazing thing about setting up an organization is you suddenly realize that the specialness that is human beings. You're like, God, people are willing to give up so much time and energy and attention just to kind of help you along. And you're like, why? You're like, I'm like a nobody. Like, everyone's amazing. And I mean that for like the kind of countless coffees and introductions I've had, people like Darren Robson, who's obviously a part of the AC and set up Mo Foundation. Like, he was really kind in enabling me to go on the Mo Foundation coaching training when I was starting out, individuals who've introduced us to schools. And I remember the kind of first head teacher we worked with. It's amazing looking back, isn't it, Rob, really? Because I remember the first head teacher we ever worked with. I remember being 22 and sitting in his office, and there was a really fancy coffee machine. I distinctly remember it in the kind of backhand corner. I remember telling him about my kind of vision for education and how, education should be fairer, and, we should have coaching and it enable people to be more independent. And this was a hard-nosed, 50-year-old who had been through the kind of front line of education. And it's amazing these people kind of give you the time of day because of, because they share your vision, or because they can see your passion, or whatever it is, and kind of take a chance on you. That has been what's happened throughout Coach Bright, really. I consider myself really lucky to have built up countless advisors and supporters who, whether it's offered kind of free office space, or introduced us to a school leader, or offered to kind of offer some training for, pro bono. People have done that. And I think for me, it's so much of that is down to the purpose of what we do, obviously taking coaching and applying it to disadvantaged groups. And that obviously resonates with individuals. But then too, also, I think it goes down to the amazingness of people are willing to help if you ask. And I think if there's any kind of business lesson that I could even come close to sharing, it is kind of that I'm amazed still now when you approach senior people, how much they are just willing to say yes, or willing to give up their time to share their opinion on an issue, or willing to kind of make an introduction, or even kind of, fundraise on your behalf or go to an event with you or anything like that. And that comes down to, not being afraid to ask and not being afraid to go for quite a big ask at times when you're like, you're still worried about your legitimacy, you're still worried about your credibility, still being able to do that. Because I think on balance, people are kind, aren't they? And people are kind and optimistic by nature, and, and therefore, why not?
That's wonderful, Robin. Yeah, what I was hearing there is it's the success from your point of view is very much about the strength of your community and your network and those that you know. And again, it comes back to relationships and developing and cultivating those relationships. But also when it comes to actually, realizing a vision and growing your own business or your coaching business, it's very much about asking for help and not being frightened to ask for help, because you'll often get what you ask for. And sometimes perhaps it's about having the confidence to go for a big ask at times, particularly if it's a larger or a bigger vision. Really great. I'm sensitive to your time. I can't believe how quickly this conversation is going today. But I'd love to ask you, from your point of view, you've got what I believe is quite a unique sector from a coaching perspective. And you're clearly a people-focused person. And Coach Bright as a charity is working in an area where I don't know about much coaching happening in that sector. I'm curious from your point of view, Robin, do you see any other opportunities for coaches in the sector, in the field that you work in, beyond Coach Bright?
Absolutely. I think increasingly, even in the last 7 years since doing it, coaching has become more accessible. It has become a more mainstream thing that is well understood, especially in education and the kind of young professional market. And while now still in education, head teachers will get coaches now, there will be a move towards that coming down beyond just senior leadership. So I think increasingly more everyday teachers will have access to coaches, more pupils will have access to coaching. And same with in the kind of corporate world, more young professionals will have access to coaching over time. For me, the answer there is in part understanding which part of that jigsaw you want to focus on. So for us, we were very clear early on that our focus is social mobility, disadvantaged pupils. We wanted to target those who were what we would call kind of mid to high attaining. So therefore, like, they weren't pupils that were severely disengaged with schools and had behavior issues, but they also weren't your like high flyers who were already doing well in school. They were almost your kind of squeezed middle who didn't get a lot of kind of focus time and attention. So we kind of knew quite early on that was the group that we wanted to target and specialize in and focus in. And I think there's something to be said for really understanding that niche that you want to cover and then kind of being unapologetic about it. I think, commonly we get asked now to do work with pupils who have really challenging behavior, or to do work with young teachers who are just entering the profession. And one of the most difficult things to do at the start is to say no, but I think that there is great power in that because it shows that you truly understand the area of the jigsaw that you're really good at and you can really focus on. So once we understood that, okay, for us it was that disadvantaged cohort, mid to high attaining, it actually enabled us to almost to act a bit more freer and going like, oh, actually these things aren't for us, or while these opportunities are really interesting, we can signpost you to different organizations or different individuals, rather than kind of feeling like you need to hoover up everything, which definitely for me at the start of my founding Coach Bright, I definitely almost felt a sense of overwhelm of like, oh God, coaching in education is such a big thing. Like there's so much, and there obviously in education there are so many problems. So you're like, which part of that do you focus on? You almost feel like you have to cover it all, and that's I feel almost a bit naive. Really, there's something about being really crystal clear, specific about which part of the jigsaw you should focus on, and then being unapologetic about that.
That's great. That's great advice there, Robin. And that's really clear in terms of how that's worked for you for your own journey and where it's leading on to next. So with that in mind, what's next for you and Coach Bright?
What's next for me and Coach Bright? Well, who knows whether those things will stay aligned. I think for Coach Bright, our plan is to become a legitimately national social mobility charity. So increasingly we want to work in areas across the country that don't get a lot of support. And a nice way to think about that might be your typical vote leave Brexit areas. We kind of call it the Boston Lincolnshire problem, which is Boston Lincolnshire is really poorly connected, really hard to get to, but also has high levels of deprivation. So how can we support areas like that? And those are the kind of areas in the country we want to grow to. The next step, which we have started doing, is to play a part in influencing government and policymakers around the power of coaching, and around how, I'm obviously biased, but I do feel the education system has become a bit too narrow over the years. It has become a little bit too focused on exams are everything. And, that's not me saying academic results and exams don't matter. I think it's just saying that we've probably placed a premium on that being the focus of education in the last decade. So increasingly we're doing more work trying to lobby the DfE around, coaching is a fantastic way to improve kind of mental health for young people and performance and academic results. And it's a fantastic thing that we should make more kind of mainstream across our kind of education system. And then I think for me, there is an interesting question for, like, I've done Coach Bright for 7 years. As with any kind of founder, you're constantly in a state of reinvention, you never fully feel comfortable with what you're doing. You're constantly learning. I think I shared with with our kind of senior management team the other day that I assumed that being a founder each year you'd get better at it, and you're like, actually you don't. It just becomes different. You're constantly learning. So I think for me it's staying with that kind of learning journey and being and essentially being comfortable with constantly having to learn, which I think every day as it comes, Rob, I'm like, some days I feel more comfortable with that and other days I don't. So yeah, kind of staying with that. But I think undoubtedly for me it will always be in that space of how can we take the amazing power of coaching and apply it to underrepresented groups, disempowered groups, and how can we do that? I kind of have always seen that as my bit of the jigsaw, if you like, and my kind of focus.
Yeah, that's great stuff there, Robin. Fabulous. Well, it's been a wonderful conversation, and I'm amazed how much we've been able to cover in such a short amount of time. Finally, where can our listener find out more about you, Robin, and Coach Bright?
So for me, I am an awful tweeter, but I've decided I'm going to become better at it. So I'm on Twitter at RobinChew1, because I think Robin Chew was taken, but RobinChew1. And Coach Bright is on Twitter too, on at CoachBrightUK. And also, like, if anyone wanted to chat about coaching and education, I'm happy to chat on LinkedIn too, which obviously just kind of search for Robin Chew or Coach Bright, and I'll be there.
That's great stuff. Well, thanks ever so much for your time today, Robin.
Thanks, Rob. Loved it.
This podcast was brought to you by the Association for Coaching. Discover more business and coaching resources, thought leadership and online learning at associationforcoaching.com.